Build creative confidence. Beat the inspiration addiction. Join the Writer's Gym. Dr Helen Marshall is an Associate Professor of Creative Writing at the University of Queensland. She has won the World Fantasy Award, the British Fantasy Award, and the Shirley Jackson Award for her 3 collections of short stories. Her debut novel, The Migration, argued for the need to remain hopeful, even in the worst circumstances. It was one of The Guardian's top science fiction books of the year. Her second novel, The Lady, the Tiger and the Girl Who Loved Death, was released in 2025. Helen, I've been a fan for quite a while, and I think one of the very exciting things for me about discovering a writer who's come to fiction through or as well as an academic career is I'm so aware of how your passions and knowledge never upstage but definitely inform what's going on for these characters. And I'm going to say hope, death, memory have all been huge things.
I think that that's right. So I did my PhD originally in medieval studies, and then sort of about halfway through, I started working for a small press that was publishing science fiction and fantasy, and I knew pretty soon that I wanted to steer in that direction. So I think my academic career anyway was a slow turning ship, and I eventually ended up in creative writing, but my research interests along the way have definitely informed my writing in various ways.
I'm tempted to ask chronological questions about that. Do you have early memories of writing, reading, and what sort of came first?
I grew up in a small town in Canada, and my mom gave me the Greek myths and the Arthurian legends to read. So I got into fantasy at a really, really young age. And then I think when I was about maybe 10 or 12, my mom encouraged me to join a medieval reenactment group. And it was really at that stage that I began writing a lot. I was a medieval bard, and I was writing a lot of medieval style poetry and performing things around campfires. And that was really my first experience of being part of an artistic community where, you know, there were a lot of people writing and giving each other feedback, and it was really supportive. And I think actually that was what eventually led me to medieval studies as a topic of my PhD.
And there's also an immediate audience relationship there, isn't there, that when performing is part of it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was really, really shy as a kid. And I remember the idea of reading a poem I had written out loud in front of other people was about the scariest thing I could possibly imagine doing. And I think the first time I did it, I remember having like an almost out of body experience. I felt as if I was floating above my body, kind of watching my body read a poem out loud. But I mean, there's something good, I think, about being an artist and sort of doing the thing that you imagine is the scariest thing possible and sort of surviving it.
Yeah, because once it's been the scariest thing possible and you do it and the world seems to have not fallen over yet, that feeling can be applied to other things, can't it? That if the scariest thing turns out to be completely doable and you're kind of you're welcome to the party, like you are seen as a writer, seen as one of the community.
Yeah, even when you're 12 years old, I think it can be a really, really powerful feeling. You may not have polish and what you're producing might not be perfect, but just to have adults and other people kind of listen to you and take you seriously for a moment, I thought it was really incredible. And it was a really incredible community that I was part of.
And that 12-year-old, if she were to look at the writing that you've done and the career that you've had so far, would she see a lot of herself in it?
It's a good question. I always think that 12-year-old me would, I hope, be very, very happy with where 40-year-old me has ended up. I think I would be surprised at what I ended up writing because I was not at all drawn to horror as a child. I was a really, really frightened child. Like, I had kind of night terrors for a really, really long time. I wouldn't read any horror. I definitely wouldn't watch any horror movies. And I kind of only circled around to dark fiction maybe in my 20s because I was working for this publishing company. And I think because I had been so afraid as a kid, and to be honest, I still kind of am. Like, I don't really watch a lot of horror movies. I do read horror books from time to time, or I did before I had a child, and that actually became a lot harder afterwards. But I could feel that it was really powerful and it had a powerful impact on me. And then that eventually, I think, became something that I mined and felt like I could be in control of. So some parts of my career I would find quite surprising.
You've definitely hit on something that I think I really responded to in your writing, because I did not see myself as a horror fan in any way as a child, despite the fact, or teenager, despite the fact that when I went, Just as a note, Rachel, you're doing English literature. Your favourite thing is gothic fiction. Your favourite film is the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Did you not maybe think that actually you love ghost stories? But I did that thing where, you know, that appalling, not it's a broad church, but it's a narrow corridor horror equals limbs falling off the end, you know, and it was so wrong and so emotionally rewarding when I discovered that writing about our fears and facing our fears and what the stories we are telling ourselves are, you know, that was what probably brought me to being the writer I became and becoming. And there's something in that, isn't there? Certainly for migration and childhood and fear, and then what happens when you go into the adult world. I think maybe that's something I've been responding to in a lot of your work.
Yes, and I'm really interested in children and writing from the perspective of children, in part because they have this blurred line of what the world is and what the world could be, so that they're constantly both sort of inventing it and responding to it, sort of adjusting their perception of what is possible within the world. And I think that becomes a really interesting place to play in terms of speculative fiction and in terms of horror, because I think as a child you're told not to be afraid of things. You are afraid of things. And in fact, there are scary things in the world. So there's this sort of constant calming lie that is going on all the way through your childhood that I think you can sense is not true, but you don't really have the tools to be able to navigate that.
And something about coming into your own power as well, that a lot of the young characters, and I will be spoiler free, of course, with everything, but a lot of young characters are coming up against that false certainty in their adults, and the use of it's going to be all right, and the feeling that you're just saying that, and what does it mean that you're just saying that? What are adults doing that possibly they're trying to help, but when is it time for me to rebel? When is it time for me to go and do something that maybe isn't all right by your standards? Is, I guess, the coming of age thing, isn't it?
It is, and I think that I'm definitely a rule follower, and so one of the things that I really like writing is characters who don't necessarily follow the rules or who are willing to break the rules, because I'm always really fascinated about what happens on the other side of that. Like, I recognize the potential for growth that comes from breaking the rules, and that many of the rules that we are given are rules we should not in fact be following. But I really love following a rule.
It's safety, isn't it? And it's group dynamics as well. I was listening to an interview with Paul McCartney the other day where he was talking about the influence of his long-term wife Linda on his work, and that a phrase that he always remembered her saying was, "It's allowed." This is a superstar who at the time had pretty much every artistic possibility open to him, and he'd be saying things to himself along the lines, "Oh no, I can't do that, or I'm not supposed to do that." I love hearing those examples that that's going on for everybody, that there's rules that we've swallowed, or that there's a sense that we're supposed to, and actually finding freedom can be a really tricky thing. Is that something that you find in the writing process? Are there times where you have to say to yourself, because I mean, with life circumstances, with work, with academic careers, we all sort of find our own ways of doing this, and it's of course different for everybody. But I'm always fascinated by how people's time relationship works and how they carve those niches and get used to the idea that those niches are as real as responsibilities to other people.
Yeah, I suppose there's a couple of things that jump to mind. One of the first is that I think making myself consciously aware of the moments when I'm getting frightened in the writing process, or that I'm feeling uncomfortable in the writing process, and sometimes actually being able to write towards that. So when I was working on The Migration, for example, the first draft I did of it, none of the characters would really kind of talk to each other or confront each other because I don't like confrontation. And I had to go in and deliberately say, all right, these characters need to talk to each other about what's actually happening and what it is that they're feeling, because that works a lot better on the page than in real life, where we can all just sort of, roll our eyes at each other or sort of avoid each other. So that was sort of interesting to learn about myself. You kind of learn what are the edges of your own personality, I think, when you're writing, because you figure out where you're comfortable and where you're uncomfortable. And I think one of the benefits of being a writer is you get to play with that a little bit. But also, yes, the question of, it's allowed. What am I allowed to spend my time on when I have an infinitely busy day? Also, when am I allowed to rest? Also important, I think, when you have an infinitely busy day. For me, producing fiction is a part of my job because I'm a researcher of creative writing and a lecturer in creative writing, but at the same time, it is not the part of my job that is ever in the most demand from other people. I have students who want things from me and kind of want it immediately. The university has endless paperwork that they would really like me to fill out very, very well and very, very quickly. And at the end of the day, the writing is solitary and slow and beautiful, and it involves being self-absorbed in a way that I find at odds with most of the rest of my life, but valuable precisely for all of those reasons.
And the fact that these books are in the world, they've made it. Is there anything you might say has worked for you that might be either just a tip or an acknowledgement of making those? Because I guess, like I said, this may not be it for you, but for me, it's the emotional boundaries. It's knowing that a closed door is absolutely okay, and that there are times when it needs to happen in order to create these things.
Yeah, I think some important things to realize are, in order to write, you probably have to say no to some other things in your life, and that you've got to figure out what exactly that is going to be. I mean, Stephen King talks about, checking your TV out the window. TV eats up quite a lot of time you could be spending on other things. I know why we all watch TV, but, there were stages in my life where it meant saying no to going out and seeing friends. There was a while where it meant saying no to writing my PhD, which was dangerous and definitely felt quite risky while I was doing it. Right now, it means saying no to my inbox and being disciplined about not checking email or trying to make writing the first thing I do in the day, because it will be the thing that I do for the next several hours rather than looking at my inbox. I think the other thing that strikes me is when I first started teaching writing, I used to think that we all had the same 24 hours. And now that I have a small child, I think we do not all have the same 24 hours at all. We all have really, really different shapes to our lives and shape to our time. The writing doesn't really care. The writing is still going to ultimately take the time that it is going to take. So you need to figure out what it is that you're going to trade, I think, in order to have that. And sometimes that means speaking very honestly to your family and making sure that your family is also willing to make those trades to give you that space.
With some of the members of the Writers' Gym, something I've noticed is people can get into the habit of not differentiating between writing time and rest time, that they'll see me time as where you start to pack all of those things into. And something I'm very keen on is treat it like a job, means find an ending to it, do the draft, but it doesn't only mean that. It means don't always be at work. It means find time to rest. And, as you say, kids' life, it is hard, but rest is important, isn't it?
It is important. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you can't give all of the parts of yourself away. There's also writing time which is really active and writing time which is really passive. And both of those things can be valuable, because I do think sometimes you need dreaming time. Sometimes you need frustrated time. Sometimes you need time in which you're circling a problem and making very, very slow progress. I feel like every time I hit a good phase of writing, I think to myself, this is what it's supposed to feel like all the time. And this is what it feels like for all the other writers all of the time. And then whenever it is not that, I think, what am I doing wrong? But my husband's a writer. I have many writing friends, and I think watching the fluctuations, the sort of emotional fluctuations and the productivity fluctuations of all of those friends makes me understand more clearly that there are periods when you go fast and there are periods when you go slow, and you need to accept that and be gentle to yourself.
And there's something of massive practical value in doing the things in our lives that gets us in that state where we understand that there are lots of writers around, and whatever stage you're at, there will be other people at a similar stage, and seeing them struggling in their own version of the way you're struggling. The brain adjusts, doesn't it? It goes, oh, right, this is normal. This is what being human, being a writer is like, rather than I'm in this box entirely on my own with these entirely unique fears and problems, and then so's everybody else.
And I think along those lines, Anne Lamott in her book, Bird by Bird, has really good advice about writing jealousy. And I always give my students that to read, because we definitely go through phases of, well, I will say I definitely go through phases of writing jealousy, whether it's, somebody who's published more or won something that I wanted, or even just if my husband has had a better writing day than I have had, then I'll feel a little bit of writing grumpiness, I suppose, about it. But, we're all on our own journey, and you've got to be able to let go of it. One, it's a normal feeling, but you do need to be able to let go of it, because writing careers and writing success is like a giant game of snakes and ladders, and sometimes things kind of rocket up, and then sometimes things just really slide back down again, and you don't really get a lot of control about what happens. The only thing you really get control about is are you still going to sit down and do some more writing?
It's very valuable, I think, hearing people whose books have done so well. I mean, I won't read out all of the awards. I will merely say the bio that we used is a short version. And when you talk about the moments of the snakes and ladders and it being in those up moments, I mean, I'm guessing the scared, the fear, or the comparison fairies and all of that, it doesn't magically go away completely when things are going well, does it? I mean, we take our feelings with us.
The really hard advice to give to people who are just setting out on the writing journey is almost all of the demons that are haunting you right now don't really go away. And one of my colleagues at the university said something to me maybe last year that really stuck with me, which is that it's really important to make friends with your demons. And I think that that's true, because they are going to sit with you for a long time. It's not so much that you banish them, I think you begin to get a little bit more comfortable with them. You know what they're on about. You know when to listen to them because they have good advice for you, and then you know when to not listen to them because they also have bad advice for you.
Do they have any catchphrases for you that stop you sitting down and doing the writing? Because we have a game called Excuses Bingo, which is what are the phrases that come up. It's very bird spotting, it's very animal, but things like, by the time so and so was my age, they published 75 of the thing I haven't done one of yet, and those phrases that come through our heads again and again and are there to keep us in the status quo of not having written the thing that we do actually want to get in the world. I'd love to know if there are any you catch. It's about catching what those phrases are, recognising them when they come past and going, oh, hi, it's you again. It's 10:30 a.m. You've just had this thought. I notice on my Excuses Bingo grid, I had this thought at 10:30 yesterday as well. Oh, that's surprising. And then you can sort of laugh at them rather than believing that they're documentaries instead of anxiety. Do you have things you catch yourself sort of saying or stopping yourself with?
That whenever I'm writing in bad taste. I think that the bad taste one is one that sits heavily in my mind. I didn't actually probably so much 10 years ago, and I think it does partially come from being in academia and occupying a different position, supervising students. I feel like I am supposed to be a serious person, and I am not supposed to write about Santas that have no anuses and so explode because they're full of poop, stuff like that. And I think it's important to be able to write in bad taste, because you don't always know what is in good taste and what is in bad taste, and you certainly aren't going to push the envelope. So I think that that's one that can be freeing to me, because things that I find horrific, I sometimes find quite funny. And that's actually one of the ways that I write through them, is sometimes turning it into something that will seem quite funny to me, so that it doesn't affect me so much. So that would be one of my writing excuses.
And it's so interesting because they so often are the superpowers in disguise, the things that we think, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to do that, or that's somehow not right, or a proper adult wouldn't do that, because we still believe there are proper adults. Actually, that's the magic. That is the story. That is the style that only you in all of time and space are ever going to have. That's our responsibility, isn't it? To get it out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes that means just accepting that people will misread you. I think that that's an interesting change that has come over me. The older that I get, the less worried I am about people thinking I'm a weirdo. I feel much more comfortable with that, and recognizing that I like who I am. I find who I am quite interesting. I don't feel comfortable pretending to be anybody else. They're probably easier people that is to be, but given that I am who I am, I can't really change it. I might as well just revel in it
and relish it. That uniqueness, because I do think that is one of the ones I'd want to send back through time to younger me, is every wasted moment of trying to be what you think normal is. And then we realise, of course, everybody's equally scared. I mean, how much disk space could we save in our minds if we were not torturing ourselves unnecessarily with that? So yes, I'm a big fan of, I think weird is a beautiful word in all of its ways. I'd love to ask a bit more about that level of focus, of creative confidence, that how do you best fit creative writing maybe into your day, or what are the boundaries that help you, that you put in place so that you get time that is meaningful to you?
I find that they're always changing. And so much of the advice that I read in various places when I was learning to write about, say, writing X number of words a day or setting aside an hour, for a variety of reasons, that doesn't really work with my life. Partially because I've got a 4-year-old who will go through a couple of stints of just not sleeping well through the night, and I'll just be shattered for a couple of weeks. Or the academic year has its own particular rhythms and seasons to it, and there are phases where it is so consuming there's not really much of me left to do anything else. So some of it is understanding when the clouds are going to open up a little bit and then seizing those moments when they come. Some is about just taking blocks of time and scheduling them and saying, all right, this is what I'm going to be doing in that time, and I'm going to have to make sure that I don't schedule anything else around that, so I can give myself some clear blocks. Ooh, what I did find was my first 2 books took me about 6 years each to write, because I was not very good at planning, and I kept mucking around with the structure and doing about 20 drafts of each of them. So the biggest thing that I have learned, which I learned while I was on maternity leave and sort of like continually nursing a tiny baby and being unable to leave a chair for sort of like 18 hours at a time, was to spend a lot more time thinking about what the narrative arc of a novel is going to be, and then trying to break it down into manageable parts and just hold the parts that I was working on in my head. So steering by, the metaphor that I often use is, imagine I'm driving a car and I'm just really kind of navigating based on what I can see in the headlights of the car rather than knowing the full journey. Because that kind of, if I can imagine what the chapter I'm working on is, and I know broadly where the next chapter is going to go, then I don't get stuck. And I just have to trust that the broad arc that I have laid out for the novel will carry me through. But so then just being able to focus on individual bits. If I've got 10 minutes at a computer, then just being able to say, I am just going to write a paragraph of what this character sees when they look out the window. And stringing all of that together will eventually get me enough words to have a novel. So seizing the time that I have, understanding that my own rhythm ebbs and flows, but it will come back to me when I give it space. And then in those breaks when I do have time, being very, very disciplined.
That's a really helpful explanation of why those 10-minute blobs that we can grab are most helpfully part of something bigger. That if you have done that sort of aerial view of the thing, then yeah, it's a Stephen King thing, isn't it? The headlights in the car, you know, you can only see this far ahead, but you can make the journey that way. It also makes me realise exactly how much I hated driving and why I'm very glad I gave driving up, because I find that absolutely terrifying as a literal image and never want to do it again. But as a writing image, yeah, once you know there is an end point, you can use those 10 minutes with a bit more confidence, maybe.
Yeah, because the bit that would really slow me down a lot in terms of mental games that you play with yourself is just saying, oh, okay, well, I've written myself to this way and I can't imagine what the rest of the novel is going to be, or I can't imagine where I'm going to get to from here. I think that as a particular problem would often stop me from writing something. I find it's reasonably easy to sort of think through what are even if it's just like there's 3 acts to this. Less for a short story. For a short story, I will just improv the entire thing. But for a novel, the tricky bit for me is being able to remember it all, because I have very, very poor memory. Just being able to hold it all in my head. So being able to understand what the broad arc of it is, and then to be able to sort of situate myself so I know where I am in the story and just where is the next micro beat that I need to get to, means that I can do something. There's always a problem you have to solve, right? In the scene you're writing. If you sit down to do any scene, maybe the problem you're solving is I just have to, you know, have my character open their eyes and look around them, or I need to have them begin a conversation. I don't even need to write the entire conversation. I just need to have them begin a conversation about this, or I just need to transition this scene. So sometimes just breaking it down into what is the smallest puzzle of this novel that I could reasonably solve today, work on that bit.
And also leaving, presumably, if you've got the essence of it, if you've got the sort of key word or key thought of it, knowing you can leave that there and fill it out later and carry on with another little puzzle.
I would really hope that I could, but I could not trust that I could. Ooh. Because I have such poor memory, and I'm always just needing to remind myself of what the story is and sort of needing to bring myself back into what the story is. But I do find that sometimes you reach kind of knots in your novel that you're trying to unravel. And I find the trick for those is to just figure out what is the easiest thing to do. What is the easiest part of it to tackle? And if you can tackle all of the easy bits, then whatever the next level of like medium difficulty bits are, by the time you've got through all the easy bits, those will have got a bit easier. And so you can kind of slowly unravel it just by working on easy bits instead of going for the really, really hard stuff right off the bat.
Was short story collections first, novels second, your taste evolving? Or was it other things?
So I started with poetry initially, and then I moved to short stories because I wanted somebody to publish a book of my work. I started working for this press and I saw that they were doing these really, really beautiful books. And I thought to myself, I would just like to have a beautiful book. So I will learn how to write short stories because they're publishing short stories. And then I fell in love with the short story form because it feels a lot like writing poems, but there was something that I had to learn along the way, which was to let go of writing a particular kind of story that I was reading a lot of. I was reading a lot of urban fantasy, so sort of Neil Gaiman, Charles DeLint, and I thought, oh, that's probably what I'm going to write. Just couldn't make it work for me. There was a writer named Robert Shearman who I was editing, and when I met him, and we would sort of go out to the pub and chat, I realized that all of his stories were very clearly in his own voice. Like they just sounded like him talking and telling a story of what had happened in his day. And that made something click for me, where I realized I could just write stories that sounded like me talking about my day and how I felt and thought about various things. And that was when I started being able to kind of publish stories. That was when the shape of the short story, I think, became clearer and more natural for me. And then I found the move to novel writing very, very hard. The migration took me ages to do. I found it very, very painful because short story structures and scenes work radically differently than novel structures and scenes and emotional intensities. And it took me a while to figure that out. So I had to sort of think through what a structure look like, but also like what do the sentences of a novel look like and how are they different from the sentences of a short story?
Of everything I've read in the last few years, the migration is probably the example I would pick of swan-like, effortless, gentle, natural thought process in the style of the narrative voice. It felt so utterly at home in itself. And it was one of the things I am in awe of. And it is so reassuring to have that as an example of, as with the swan, you have the graceful up here and you have the, beneath the surface doing the hard work. And I think this is one of the things that I hope this podcast is really useful to people for is understanding that it's not a sort of shiny, it just magically happens. These things are the result of hard work, personal evolution, doing all the difficult stuff that you need to do. So I'm glad you picked that example. That is personally encouraging for me, and I hope for other people as well.
Yeah, it's true, because it doesn't even have a complicated structure to it at all. Like it's pretty straightforward. It took me ages to figure out how to do it.
Rob Shearman, I can see why you'd say that. So for anybody who hasn't heard others in our circle talk about him, the 3-volume We All Hear Stories in the Dark short story structure where all the stories lead to the other stories. I mean, I completely see why you call that simple in relation to his life choices. But really?
Well, when I wrote The Lady, the Tiger, and the Girl Who Loves Death, like that has a complicated structure to it. It's moving in and out of time and moving around. And that took me ages and ages to draft, not the sentences of it, which I think I felt okay with the sentences of it, but it took me a long time to get the structure for that one, and to make it make sense and to make it kind of work, at least in my head, hopefully in other people's heads. What I learned after that was actually write simple structures. Saves you a lot of time to write simple structures. And so the book that I wrote after that, which is a science fiction novel, which has not been published yet, has, I think, a quite straightforward structure. And it was so much fun to write as a result of that, because there was a kind of narrative propulsion where I could just, at the end of the day, ask, okay, well, what happens next? Like logically, what happens next from here, as opposed to sort of needing to fit the beats of what was happening into a kind of complicated structure. One of the things I thought early on in my writing was that things had to be complicated for them to be good. And it took me a while to realize it is okay to say to yourself, how do I make this simpler to write? How do I make it easier? How do I make it more enjoyable to write? And that all of the things you want to be there, the complexity, the depth, they will find their way in. You don't have to engineer them by kind of trying too hard. If you just sort of follow your characters, follow your worlds, follow the implications of what you're putting on the page, it will all get there. But there's a real beauty in terms of saying to yourself, I just want to enjoy what it is that I am doing, and I want to deliberately make this novel pleasurable for myself. So I will write towards things that I know I will find pleasurable to write into it.
I feel like that is the life advice as well that we really all need to give ourselves most of the time, is if it feels simple, if it feels like me, that doesn't mean I'm doing it wrong. That means I'm doing it right. Just go to you. Yeah, absolutely. There's 3 pieces of advice that I kind of come back to from improv theory. So notice more, use everything, and let go. And
I'm good friends with two other writers, Kim Wilkins and Lisa Hannett, and we give this advice to each other. But each of us are drawn to a particular thread of that, and mine is always let go. I feel like much of my writing, much of my struggle with process, much of my struggle with life is about holding things close and then trying to figure out how to let go of them a little bit. So that is the piece of advice that I kind of keep coming back to with myself, is how do I just let go a little bit more?
That is excellent advice on everything except writing boundaries and making sure that we are absolutely ironclad or making space for those.
But even then, right? Like there's times where you've just gotta, you've gotta let go and be gentle on yourself, because there are emergencies that intrude into your life. And I think being able to accept that and flow with it rather than letting it compound a sense of frustration is probably quite healthy.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think for me, it's just about that thing where I think some of the people that I work with may have lost quite a bit of time to living in emergency mode, to not being able to stop letting the anxiety win about somebody else might need me, and am I selfish if I close the door and things like that. And from a thriving rather than surviving perspective, yes, just yes. Happy to sort of ask more around short stories, poetry, novels. Are you still drawn to all of them? Are you going to just see what happens as you go?
That's a really good question. I haven't written poetry in a long time, and I haven't written short stories very much recently. I think that I love the short story as a form. I teach the short story. I'm working on a non-fiction book with Kathleen Jennings about how to write speculative short stories, which pulls together all of the things I think about the way that speculative short stories are different from other forms of short stories, and what you do with that information. How do you write knowing that? But I think more recently I have been doing novel writing, in part because I found a sudden kick of enjoyment of having switched over from novel writing being really hard to novel writing being very enjoyable and satisfying. And I think I am probably, honestly, like, this is the phase of my life in which I've been the most squeezed between various kinds of responsibilities. So I can see things kind of shrinking down a little bit, and I can see how I've been adjusting to that in my practice. And also trying to remind myself that it is a season, and that will change, and things will kind of open up in different ways in the future. So I don't know. I think I will probably go back to the short story. I don't know if I will go back to poetry. I think I don't have the same ear for it as I had when I was writing a lot of it. And I find you kind of have to tune in to a particular form of writing to sort of live and breathe and see the world in the way that form asks you to.
Going back to what we were saying about almost the simplicity of it, that when you realised I can write as me, it doesn't have to be complicated. The complication, or rather the depth rather than complication, will come through anyway. That may become a completely different form. We may be having this conversation in a year or two and you're writing poetry, songwriting, haiku champion, who knows? But I guess it's about listening to interests and voice, isn't it? When you have further adventures with the books, please will you come back and talk to us more?
I would love to.
Brilliant. I look forward to that. Helen Marshall, thank you very much for joining the Writers' Gym.
Thank you very much for having me.
You've visited the Writers' Gym with author and coach Dr Rachel Knightley. Production and sound design are by Ashley Lexine, and theme music is by Chris Gregory.